Testing 1, 2. Joel, are you
Perfect.
there?
Joel is here. Derek, are you there?
I'm here.
All
Let's do
right.
it. It's Tuesday.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Shy Hack Night Remote. This is Shy Hack Night number 405, and we're glad you could join us. My name is Joel Inwood, and I will be your host this evening, along with Derek Eater. Uh,
Hi,
tonight, we're
everyone.
very Tonight, we're very excited to be hosting Rheaply. We have Gar Panett, their Chief of Staff and Sustainability. And yeah, Derek, you want to take it away?
Yeah, for sure. So what we do on these live streams is we'll hear a presentation shortly. Before we do that, we'll have some announcements. Um, After that, the presentation will start. It'll go for about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll have a chance to do Q&A. So we'll be monitoring the live chat here on the YouTube live stream page for questions. So as you're listening to the presentation, if you want to actually go ahead and start typing in a question that you have, we will try to ask those questions when we get to Q&A in the order that they were asked. So go ahead and start typing those questions in. Joel and I probably have a couple of questions of our own that we'll get things started with, but the goal here is to try to get folks to, for you all to have a chance to ask your questions. And then the second thing I'll mention before we move on is we have a code of conduct, and it's, even though we're all online and not physically in the same space, it still applies. So I would invite you all to read our code of conduct. You can find that on the chyhacknight.org website. So I think with that, we can go ahead and move on to announcements. You want to kick us off with the first one, Joel?
Yeah, so upcoming presentations, we have Lyric Opera of Chicago's Empower Youth Program coming up on 7/21. On the 28th, we have 47th Ward Alderman Matt Martin, freshman. And on August 4th, we have the Chicago Reporter, WBEZ, visualizing the Illinois reopening plan one. So that's going to be really good too. Pretty excited for that.
Mark your calendars, folks. We got
Yeah.
action-packed month. Cool. I'll get this next one. So this is an announcement that I am involved in. Some of you may have seen that late last week, the Chicago Reporter released a story about the Chicago Police Department deactivating the arrests database that was used to check the arrest reports that the city had been publishing. That API was shut down. In fact, we actually got a question from a few weeks ago about this when President Peckwick was online presenting. There was a question about it, but we didn't have an answer. I don't think, because it was, I think, outside of really the county's jurisdiction. But since then, the story came out, and it led to quite a bit of a reaction from folks online, including myself, who was a member of the mayor's transition team on good governance. So I took it upon myself to make my opinion known about the turning off of this API. But then actually within a few days, the city was able to restore access to this data. So I think overall, there's still some questions to be answered about what happened and why it happened, but the outcome was ultimately a good one in that the data is now available. And in fact, there's a new anonymized arrest data set that is now publicly available that doesn't have any identifying information in it, but is still useful. So welcome you to go take a look at that on the data portal and learn more about the arrests that the City of Chicago Police Department is doing.
All right, next up we got the OIG, Office of the Inspector General. For those of you who don't know, the units of local government often have, and national government, have what's called an OIG, which is an office that is a part of the government but independent, and they investigate the activities that the government has been up to. In March of this year, the OIG for the city of Chicago published a report about their open data program, something very near and dear to our hearts. And I encourage everyone to check it out at bit.ly/the Chicago Data Portal. And we'll put a link to that also up here in the YouTube comments. And Yeah, long story short, they thought that the city has a lot of work to do on their open data program, and I know a lot of folks at Shy Hack Night will be very interested to follow the developments on that.
Hmm.
Thanks.
And I actually think that there's a role that folks at Chi-Hacknet could play and help in helping to resolve some of the issues that the Inspector General found. So if you're looking for a way to contribute back with your tech and data skills, there's a list of things that you could potentially do to help. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at that report. Okay, this is another one from actually from me. So in addition to being president of Chi-Hacknet, I also run a company called DataMade. And over the last month and a half or so, we've been retrospecting on the work that we've done and looking back on some of the work that, even though it had good intentions, perhaps possibly caused or maybe did cause actual harm. And so through some internal conversations at our company, decided that we are going to no longer support institutions of policing or incarceration, and we would actually like to encourage the civic tech community to do the same. So you can read more about the blog post on the DataMade website and learn a little bit more about the work that we have done, the work that we're sort of scrutinizing, and then what our commitments are and why we're doing it, more importantly. So I'd encourage folks to take a look at that and to consider following in the same path.
Your census. We don't have a cowboy, and if I could have at least got a hat, I would have felt
We're gonna
better.
get a
But
hat, the lime green hat for sure. Every time we mention
that
this.
lime green hat. So the census is still going on. To date, Illinois is at 66%, Cook County is at 61%, and Chicago is at 54%. So if you're in that 45% or know someone who might be, tell them to go to my2020census.gov. And it's super easy, just takes a second. And there are, I think it's thousands of dollars per head that in like different types of federal money that's available based on how many people say they live there during this census. And there's only one every 10 years. So if we miss our shot, you got 10 years to live with the consequences.
I think that
Everyone go
there's
to,
something like it's like $1,400 a year per person
yeah,
that it doesn't get counted that the state could lose out on in terms of federal funding. So yeah,
and
big
representation.
dollars and representation
Yeah,
as
the
well.
number of elected officials we have in Washington also directly related to our census count.
Yeah, so it's important. Please do it.
Do your census.
All right. Yeah, so the last thing to note before we get into our main presentation is after this live stream, we have a Zoom call that is open for anyone to join. And the idea behind this is to bring back some of the in-person interactions, social interactions that we had back when Chi Hack Night was an in-person event. So we all join in a big Zoom call. We do some introductions again, share some community announcements if folks have them. And then that's a place for breakout groups to do their pitches. So you're welcome to join. That starts around 8 o'clock after the live stream concludes. And the link is bit.ly/CHN remote Zoom. We'll also put that link. I think we actually already have that link in our Slack channel as well. All right, those are our slides. So I think it's time for us to turn it over to our feature presentation.
Yeah.
Are you there?
I'm here, everybody. Gar Punnett.
All right, Gar Punnett,
Right.
we'll let you take it from here.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Derek, Josh, and Joel. I'm going to run right into this, and I look forward to all the questions that might come in. We're going to do it a little bit differently than I'm used to today. So I've got a couple panels up on another screen. So I'm gonna be looking away and coming back to the camera every once in a while. And I kind of thought this would be a little more dynamic than a regular slide presentation. Kind of the goal here is I'm going to run you through Rheaply's AXM platform, our asset exchange manager, which is directly related to the work that we've now done with the Chicago PPE market. I think this will set sort of the stage of the PPE market, and then I can talk a little bit about what our goals are in the concepts of circular economy, and then I can even take it a little step further and talk about how we are looking to further the circular economy into connecting cities and connecting communities and citizens to the resources around us. So I'm going to request that I believe, Josh, that I might be able to share my screen. I can. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and throw my screen onto our asset exchange manager. And I'm going to kind of blindly go with the green light that's highlighting. Joel, I wouldn't mind some feedback on whether this is working.
Works. Looks good.
Excellent. So what we're seeing right now is our asset exchange manager. This is Rheaply's software, our flagship software platform that is focused on scaling reuse and circular economies within organizations. Now I'm going to kind of unpack that real quickly. The best way I can describe this is we work with a lot of large organizations that buy a lot of stuff. And it should be no surprise to anybody that when they're done with things and when things kind of sit around in their offices, and we might all be able to think of things that we've seen for a year that sit in the corner, and then they end up in the closet, and then they end up in a warehouse. Well, AXM is meant to increase the sharing capability between employees to get the most out of those assets that are sitting idle, sitting underutilized away, ultimately before they get thrown out. So what typically happens is, again, it might sit there, it might depreciate, and then ultimately someone comes across it and says, we don't need this anymore, and they throw it out when it might actually have a use to someone, and it might have a use to another organization who's willing to take it. So our AXM technology here was meant to increase that sharing, and how we do that is by connecting colleagues to one another internal to large organizations. In the Chicago area, some of our biggest clients include AbbVie Pharmaceutical up in Lake Forest, to the University of Chicago down in Hyde Park, where these are both organizations that do a lot of research. They buy a lot of stuff every year. They spend a high amount of money on procuring, but then also we're going to try to help them save money by procuring within through reuse. And so what we're going to see here is our demo site. And I'm going to quickly kind of go through. And ultimately, this site was started and this platform was started because of the research that came out of our CEO, Dr. Gary Cooper. And Dr. Cooper, or just Gary, found that in his own PhD studies, he had a lot of things that he didn't need in his own studies and that he was willing to share with his colleagues. So it's in this vein that we see a lot of research equipment. Again, this is a demo site, so we see a lot of things that are typical across many different verticals or industries. But if I were to go through the listings, some of the conversations that we're having with these resources include what we're going to see here are a lot of chemicals, and then lots of related sorts of things to the PPE market. So ultimately, that's where this goes next, is we took the idea that we're connecting colleagues to one another and to resources that they have internal to organizations. And we said, you know what, at the beginning of our COVID crisis, we thought, well, what if we take 2 bits of functionality that we have on our platform, which is essentially, I have this and I'm willing to give it away, or I need this and I'd be willing to take this from someone. And so what we ended up doing was starting the PPE market. So I'm actually gonna stop sharing here. And I'm gonna take us to the official PPE market. Let me know, I should be, now I think I have the hang of it. So here's the actual PPE market. So what ended up happening was because we took that 2 functionality, we created actually our first iteration was the emergency response exchange. So this was in the beginning of the COVID crisis where we thought, you know what, maybe there are emergency responders who really need things from the community that they might not be able to procure themselves because the supply chains were broken or they were limited in some capacity. So we actually created the emergency resource exchange, and it failed. So I think I saw in one of the highlights of what to talk about at Shy Hack Night is the failures or the learning outcomes. And we actually created something that didn't work because ultimately I think we created a tool that people weren't ready for in an emergency scenario. And so people were trying to learn the tool and sort of just do their daily operations to response to the COVID crisis. And then, so we were kind of pivoting and we were trying to figure out, well, how do we create something that helps our community? And then we got the call from the city of Chicago. We ended up getting the call from Samir Mayakar, who's the deputy mayor of economic and neighborhood development. And it was their idea to take what we had built in the emergency response exchange and create this Chicago PPE market. So ultimately, the idea here was, can we create a simple market where we can connect local suppliers of protective resources like hand sanitizer? Can we connect these suppliers to local small businesses who are going to be looking for these resources upon reopening, and who are going to essentially not want to go through maybe other procurement channels in which prices might actually spike when there's an increase in demand? So the whole idea here between the Chicago PPE market was that we are connecting local suppliers with the local demand, and making sure that we could keep the price low so that it wasn't an additional burden to the small businesses upon reopen. What we did here is we built in a couple features where, in terms of how businesses could message one another. So in this case, this is our corporate end here. So we don't have any message populating, but small businesses could contact these local suppliers when they actually go through and buy something. And so I'll actually run through that real quickly, where we actually built this all in around, like 2 weeks. I mean, we really put our product team through the ringer on this one, and it was something that they really stepped up to the plate for. And so let's take something like this, which this is gel hand sanitizer. And what you can see here is we've got a whole lot of different descriptions available for this item in terms of where it is, what it is, how we can make the offer, the quantity that's remaining, including how much is remaining of your weekly maximum. We actually built that feature into ration the amount of supplies that were able to be taken by small businesses, just in case we wanted to preempt a run on these supplies. And so ultimately, what we could do here is we could make an offer. I don't believe if I make an offer, it's going to be live. Okay, good. So ultimately, what we would do here is we have the initial submit offer portal. If I actually were to hit submit offer on this, this payment is live. So I would actually be buying this hand sanitizer. So I'm not going to do that to show you how the Rheaply receipt gets processed. But ultimately, if I were to hit submit offer, I could add a message, and that message would take me back to the messaging platform here, where I could actually do a direct message with the supplier, receive the invoice, and then pay for that, and then figure out the logistics. So this was something that we did in conjunction with the city of Chicago, and wanted to provide this as an opportunity to just connect the supply and the demand and make sure that we could do this in the most efficient way possible. So in that vein, and I'm hoping I can take more questions on this later down the road in this presentation, but this is where, as an admin too, as we built out the platform, you can actually see all of the resources that are now populated throughout the platform. And so this includes any of the facial masks, other types of guards in terms of face shields or plastic security shields, where anything that a business might own or need within these three categories, they could procure from this site. The idea as well is that we could actually open this up to other suppliers that might have more protective gear as necessary upon reopen. I'm happy to report that this was a very good success. I think within the first week, we ended up getting around 12 to 1,500 people to sign up, small businesses to sign up. And that was largely due to the fact that our CEO, Gary Cooper, got to stand up with Mayor Lori Lightfoot and announce this initiative to really try to help these small businesses get the resources that they needed. So with that, ultimately, we initially engaged in a 3-month experiment in this way. And we're actually now going to be coming up on that 3-month window where we get to kind of decide, well, what's the future of the Chicago PPE market? Do we need it? Is this something that can be or should be continued on in terms of our response to our COVID crisis here in Illinois? And then with this PPE market, we've actually been now contacted by other cities in the United States and other states in the States. So with that, we're hoping to expand this out to continue to help other communities. On our end, We do not manage the process of businesses that come in and out. That is largely held to the responsibility of the city, where upon sign up, the small business would put in their small business ID number, and then that's how they get added to a list where then they can start to access these types of listings for their operations and for their day-to-day. I'm gonna stop presenting this and quickly jump into the circular economy and why this all sort of connects. Really, the idea here for Rheaply and for connecting communities and citizens and businesses and governments is that we are trying to figure out the new digital future for a circular economy, and how do we start to connect organizations where we can be more resource efficient, where we can then start to really achieve zero waste goals, more sustainability goals associated with our day-to-day operations. I'm going to take this real quickly back to the AXM platform, because I would like to show how we actually end up achieving some of these posts where people can actually list things between their colleagues, but then also how we start to track the data associated with a lot of these offerings. So in this way, this is what a simple post would look like, and it actually looks very similar to the Chicago PPE market. All of the data can be user generated in terms of what they're adding onto the platform, but it also can be input in sort of a data dump just as easily, and including images that might be relevant to the movement of these products and goods across these organizations. So in this way, what we can see here is a pretty simple form where people fill out what this is, the category that it fits into. This might be protective barriers, etc. People then can drag and drop or browse all of the all of the images that they need to put in. Then they can select the unit count, the price per units, keep it within their organization. One of the unique features that we have here on the platform is we might have 3 organizations that are using AXM's technology. We could actually do this in theory. So we've got the University of Chicago, we might have Abbey, and we might have Northwestern. And between those 3 organizations, they might want to keep all of their resources internal to one another first, so that they can actually share with their colleagues. And then actually, due to this My Organization Only tag, we can actually set a predetermined rule where then once 90 days or 30 days in this case expires in this network, then you start to see the digital permissions expand, and assets and resources can then be viewed by the whole external Rheaply community, making them more accessible to the community, but then also giving them that extra however many years of life in that asset or that resource's life cycle. So this is just one of the things that helps these assets continue to be used and not be sent to landfill. Ultimately, too, you can set expiration, a description, attachments, and then this is actually what I wanted to show everybody, which is, it's one of my favorite parts, which is the sustainability metrics, which is our take on allowing users to add in the information according to the unit cost or the unit weight. They can even tag a little bit more information. And once they do that, it gets added into the ultimate metrics of the platform. So in this way, this is where the metrics will then get added to the totals of the weight, and then so the weight diverted in terms of how much is diverted from the organization back to reuse, as well as the amount of money saved, and then also the amount of transactions per colleagues that we can do at a high level. So ultimately then, the whole idea here is that we connect the circular economy. And I don't know how familiar the Chi-Hack community is with circular economy principles, but I can just do a quick 1-minute run through here of what this means. In the best sort of circular economic framework, we would try to keep things in their life cycle as much as possible. So in this way, we're trying to mimic the biosphere. And in nature, we don't have waste. We actually, things cycle into their uses and out of their uses pretty seamlessly in terms of wasting into turning into food, and then turning into energy for something else, etc. And then this all sorts of cascades into this sort of biosphere. Well, on the technosphere side, where we do not have all of those systems built out, we've started to. And we've started to increase the amount of sharing that we have between colleagues. We can then try to maintain and prolong those items as long as possible by refurbishing or remanufacturing them. We can then continue to then recycle those items and try to make sure that the components of these items are then used before they then enter a landfill where they might actually not be really used for anything except just wasting away. In this way, this is where we start to connect our more organic circular economy. And so it's actually within this digital framework that I wanted to show everybody kind of what we're thinking about at Rheaply. And this is where I'm going to then share one last screen as I've taken everybody on this journey between in my computer, where ultimately our goal here is to connect these organizations to make sure that each organization is as resource efficient as possible. And we have our flagship AXM product now, but we're also starting to build out a suite of products that can add into whether that's traditional asset management on the finance perspective, or on the back end perspective, a disposition management workflow type system as well, where we start to then feed this into recyclers or feed this into a reshare or a sharing network or reuse network of some sort. So ultimately, this is what I wanted to show, which is just a diagram that shows how organic a circular economy can actually be when we start to connect communities and citizens and organizations to one another. And in this diagram, what we can see here is we've got users that are using AXM to trade things amongst one another. And then within the organization as a whole, we're using AXM to exchange items between these different departments and these different departmental silos, all administered by a central admin who can track where these items are being used. And then on a bigger scale, this is where we start to see how we can connect enterprise to universities to governments to make sure that each one of these resources being used as efficiently as possible. And then that's where too, what we have too is we can connect taker organizations. So ultimately connecting those that may not have as much as the University of Chicago's or the AbbVie's of the world, where we can start to connect those, like the Chicago public school system, where we can get more resources that can help students learn from some of these organizations. We then can start to connect and even branch out here and take this to material haulers and try to help connect these recycling waste streams across organizations, where we can then divert these reusable items to other use cases. And then ultimately too, start to then branch out even further till we get to what looks like a much more organic circular economy that's all being connected by our digital infrastructure. And as we try to connect resources and material flows to each one of these organizations. So I think with that, I've actually hit my time, and I'm so open to questions to make sure that both the questions around the Chicago PPE market are answered, and then any other exploratory questions around circular economy questions are answered as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
We got questions. You wanna take the first one, Joel?
All right, here we go. Accessing and using hand sanitizer is often challenging for people with disabilities. What is and can be done to make hand sanitizer more accessible?
Ooh, I think honestly that question is kind of out of my domain. To be honest, I'm trying to, I could try to make up an answer, but I don't want to do that either. And so I would probably defer to either our City of Chicago partners that might actually have resources where we could talk about how to get access to those assets. But the particular application of hand sanitizer, I'm unaware of how to do that in sort of a disabled mindset. Yep.
Cool, thanks. I'll take the next one. So you mentioned that your platform was able to keep price spikes from happening. How do you accomplish that?
So that we don't have dynamic pricing on the platform. So when something's set on our platform, it's actually the price that we negotiated and the City of Chicago negotiated with the supplier. So ultimately, unlike, a very similar example that we're all familiar with is Amazon. And as supply and demand fluctuates, we're going to see that dynamic pricing play out. hopefully everyone will still be able to get the resources they need. But on the platform that we have here between the small businesses and suppliers, it's not a dynamic pricing.
All right. Let's see. So what is the most popular item on the platform currently?
Definitely hand sanitizer. And ultimately, I think it's what's so fascinating, and I don't know how familiar everyone is with the variations of hand sanitizer that we've seen, but I bought one that was definitely, I think it was made by a local distillery, and definitely I might be wrong, but smells like potatoes, because I'm pretty sure it was made, you know, on either a process of being on its way to vodka or somewhere along the way, but it has the disinfectant properties, and it definitely has that potato smell. So ultimately, I think that's been the really interesting part, is to see these local suppliers step up and make these resources happen when they have the processes to make them.
You got that natural potato scent, right?
Yeah, it does.
Something I want anyways.
Yeah, sure. I like it. Yeah.
Cool. I'll take the next one. So do you know what the volume in products that has been bought or sold from your platform during this 3-month period?
Yeah, it was actually, I think last tracked we were around $70,000 worth of product, and I think the last number I would have gotten would have been around a week and a half ago. So I expect that went up.
All right, let's see. You mentioned that after the 3-month window, you'll be deciding if the platform should continue. What are your metrics for success?
Yeah, so actually that's a great question. The metrics mostly had to do with community response. So users, so if people were actually signing up and using the platform to exchange items, then it became the actual transactional volume and amount that were being used. So how many units were being moved from suppliers to buyers, and then the transactional amount in the case of the totals. Some of that also came in terms of a little less, I guess, a little more anecdotal, which is like the response from the community. So seeing how, if this was useful, whether this was actually working for local suppliers as well as the local businesses, and those will all sort of be rolled into the assessment of whether we need to continue to do this and whether the need is there. So I know that this is where we engaged in this as a emergency effort almost to make sure that everybody could be covered, but the free market might take hold, and we might have enough resources available for people that this may not be needed. And this is kind of one of those decisions that will kind of be up to the city of Chicago, as well as whether we want to commit to this further.
All right, I'll take the next one. So how have you communicated the availability of this platform so people with inventory would list that inventory on your site? So how do you market that this thing exists?
Absolutely. So this was, I'm not going to say a challenge in the way that it's always hard to make sure that we can disseminate this information. This was done in a coordinated effort with the mayor's office, where we blasted it on our social media platforms. I've gone around and just passed out flyers. You know, it's been everything from the digital to the physical, to jumping on and doing the announcement that we did live during a press conference, and then ultimately, hopefully, word of mouth. And so both from the supplier end and the small business end, that's ultimately how we were starting to get connected. And we took a lot of input from our website, which was ChicagoPPEMarket.com. And that's where we actually got a lot of suppliers to come and actually request that they can post their supply to the community.
All right, let's see, I'll take the next one. So your platform seems targeted at small businesses. Is that for both suppliers and purchasers? Can you share more about your vetting process for getting access to the platform?
Absolutely. So the vetting process was in the hands of the city of Chicago. So as a platform, we were just running the platform. We were running the marketplace and making sure that the digital infrastructure stayed good to go. Ultimately, the way we set it up on the website on, again, Chicago PPE Market, was that there was an opportunity to put your name, first name, last name, email, your small business identification number, which I think has the SID, I forget the acronym. And then that was the first wave of approval, where if you submitted that, then that would actually go to the city, and the city would then approve that for use on the marketplace.
Okay, so that small business identifier is something that the city, they have the ability to sort of issue those IDs, is that right?
Exactly. So they, all the small businesses already have these identification numbers, and so they were able to then sort of cross-check those numbers and approve you for the marketplace.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. I can take the next one. So do you expect high demand from schools and/or non-school youth programs who will be trying to reopen in the fall?
I hope so. This is where I would hope there would be demand for these types of products for the safety of everybody. I hope that we can actually continue to make sure that the marketplace stays open for these types of resources in the fall if we do reopen. But I do expect a demand. I think especially I don't have actually a lot of statistics on the protective shields, but I think that would be a particular interesting way for setting up guards and continually trying to make sure that the transmission and airflow is sort of sectioned off appropriately. But I would hope that we use all the protective measures that we can and resources that we can from some of these local suppliers for our schools to reopen.
All right, I'll take this one. So how are your services different from eBay?
Great question. I love this question. So ultimately, on the AXM front, we get that all the time, which is, why is this different than Amazon? Why is this different from eBay? What makes you different than Craigslist? Aside from our wonderful designers who take great pride in their work, it's about permissioning. So we are trying to build a permissioned network internal to organizations. So I didn't really get to go through all of the assets that we have, but these are higher value assets typically at a lot of these organizations that you're not just going to find on eBay, and that you actually might want to source from your colleagues internal to your organization. So these can be high-end pieces of research equipment. For some of our pharmaceutical or academic clients, this is chemicals or reagents that are used in scientific processes. So this is not just something that you can pull off of sort of an online platform very easily, but also the whole purpose of this is to connect items for reuse. And what we often see is these organizations will buy in quantities where they can achieve certain economies of scale when it comes to their pricing. And they full know that they're not going to use all of the items that they buy. We've all done this before. We're all guilty of this. And so they actually put it aside and it will just sit away. And ultimately the whole platform is built so that while that gets put away, you could actually list it on the platform and a colleague could say, oh, actually, I need this for this week's run of this experiment, or I need this for whatever use case I have. And they can actually source that from their colleague instead of waiting on the normal procurement process of their procurement teams or finance departments.
All right, I can take the next one. So regarding the sustainability metrics that you mentioned, it looks like the information is self-reported. Are there mechanisms for vetting the information that's entered in?
Right now, it is self-reported and it is manual on checking that information. So what we do is we have the ability on the platform, every admin and every admin has the ability to go in and do a sort of a QA on all of that information, so they can go in and adjust that information. But that in itself is also manual on the administration. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is better educate why the metrics are important and then how to gauge some of those metrics. So some of what we're looking at is how do we better design that type of workflow so that people understand, oh, I knew that this cost $50 because it's kind of, we all know money, but what's harder is how do we know weight? And ultimately, when you're trying to weigh something, part of this for us upcoming in terms of how we better get user info is saying, well, is X item the weight of a coconut, or is it the weight of a gallon of milk? And that we hope that actually could be a very simple potential solution for gauging that weight. And that might actually make for more accurate data. But right now, we generally advise all of, during onboarding, we advise everybody to underestimate rather than overestimate so that we can get accurate data and we're not overinflating our own metrics.
So how many coconuts is a gallon of milk?
Yeah, I bring that up now, and I'm probably at 3.5. I think someone I'm sure in the comments will be like, you're wrong, it's 4 even. So
it depends on the size of the coconut.
It depends on the size of the coconut, exactly.
Let's see. Your position as the manager of a market gives you a unique view into the businesses that use it. Have you considered publishing studies to share out how the local PPE sector, for example, is growing or changing?
Interesting question. No, we haven't considered that. Ultimately, I think we don't have enough data for the month's run that we've done. I think that does apply, however, over to the AXM platform. And even there, we have pretty strict privacy settings with a lot of these organizations around their internal operations of their resources. But ultimately, I mean, we do want to take this to a place where we can start to gather that data and anonymize it so that we can make sure that it's useful to some degree to talk about efficiencies in procurement versus how much better it is to reuse and the sustainability impact associated with reuse.
Great, I'll take the next one. So I think you have talked about this a little bit more, but we got a question on how do you plan on sustaining a sharing economy beyond the pandemic?
Yes. So right now, we have a little bit of a unique model. Typically, these types of sharing platforms are supported by transaction-only engagement. So that means that you need a high amount of community engagement to keep it going. You need a high amount of volume. It needs to be kind of done at scale for it to work. Ultimately, our goal in connecting communities and connecting cities into a sharing economy is to get it to be supported by everyone that's using it through either a subscription model or in addition to the transaction volume. So I can speak to that a little bit more. I mentioned it very briefly that we're looking to connect these organizations to one another. And each one of those organizations is going to pay a subscription fee for their own uses because we actually can prove that there's a significant ROI involved with reuse within their own organization. And so they're going to be the ones that support that larger infrastructure. So ultimately, if we think about this from an ecosystem perspective, they're going to be the whales. They're the whales that are moving through the ecosystem. And then everything can kind of filter down into the impact associated with all of these different stakeholders in this sort of circular ecosystem. To speak to how we support that, that comes down to, again, trying to do this at scale and through partnerships. So ultimately, that could be, we're looking at options right now in terms of how do we get public and private funding, partnerships between some of our largest government entities and our largest private entities. And then ultimately too, we're building other products that are market ready. So our traditional asset management platform, which tracks depreciation of assets and traditional more financing related platforms. And then on the back end, trying to work through other sorts of disposition platforms as well that help normal day-to-day operations. So we're trying to buffer and support the sharing economy by building a suite of platforms for these organizations.
All right, let's see. And I think you talked a little bit about that just then, but what is your revenue model with the Chicago PPE market?
For the PPE market, we had a subscription flat rate for the city. So it was actually pretty simple. They contracted us to build the platform for 3 months, maintain it for 3 months. And then we did not take a transaction fee out of any of these any of these transactions. So it was very simple. Ultimately, we didn't want to take a transaction fee out of this type of use case because of its direct impact on small businesses and suppliers. So we just wanted to make sure that the marketplace was there and ready to be used for the community.
I'll take the next one. So is delivery, transport from supplier to consumer part of your platform, and how is that handled?
It is not, I wouldn't say it's a part of the platform. And that was actually, that's going to be something that we're going to be doing for our flagship product. And it is something that we're looking into for the flagship product. And it was not for the PPE market. So the work or the sort of the flow, the process of how to get something, how to get one of these resources to you is typically you order it. And then that's where you can work through on messaging the supplier to see what their logistics are like. In my own experience, no joke, I was told to test the site and I accidentally bought 100 bottles of hand sanitizer. and so luckily we're going to use them for the company when we go back physically, and we're going to use them for our own safety. But ultimately I negotiated delivery. And so they had a delivery option. And then I just received the invoice via the messaging platform, and then also via my email. And so it was pretty simple. But ultimately done off platform in that way.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Let's see. What's the most common ways transportation of the products are moved from supplier to buyer? That's related, I guess.
Yeah, we might be able to do one more. Typically just they delivered, or and it was either I think somebody actually delivered it via truck with another shipment that was coming in, and I think it was like a pickup truck. And someone literally drove the supply to me, which was very nice of them.
Cool. I think we are out of written questions. I have one last one, which is in sort of this 3-month trial period. Was there anything that sort of surprised you about how it was used, or trends? And you mentioned the most popular product, but were there other things that kind of jumped out that you weren't expecting?
Honestly, the immediate need. I think I was not expecting the outpour of requests to be a part of the marketplace, and then also to see the immediate volume of transactions start to happen. I think that was probably the most inspiring thing for the team, and shout out again to our product team who turn this product around in 2 weeks. And that's, for what it is, it's relatively unheard of, I think. And they worked really hard to make that happen. And then to see that reward of it actually being used, and then to get that feedback on use and support and need was pretty cool to be a part of. And I literally only got to be there in the beginning and talking through the idea. And then my job is I get to step back and watch the magic happen as the platform gets created, and then our marketing teams and then our user success teams, customer success teams take over. So ultimately, I think that was cool to see that the small businesses, and every small business too that I talked to, ultimately loved the idea that was something that was a resource that they could use, because everyone's buying their own hand sanitizers, their own masks for their employees. Everyone wants to look at something that might be reusable instead of disposable. So I think that was a big feature for the marketplace in terms of reusable masks.
We actually just got one follow-up question on that last one that was just asked, which is, so we just talked about what was surprising. What would you, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently?
Yeah. I think what was so funny about this versus the emergency response exchange too, where I said earlier was kind of a flop, is what we took were those outcomes where we knew we had to be connected into a community. So ultimately, from, if we were to call that phase 1, into phase 2, we knew, okay, we actually need a community to want this, and then we need a backing of a government agency that can kind of give its stamp of approval and make sure that we're above board. If we were to do a phase 3, I think now, which we are sort of really considering in terms of how do we make a sharing economy across a city for other things, it quickly becomes, how do we expand this into other things, other offerings? How do we connect small businesses to resources that they need? And this will go far past the masks and the hand sanitizers and the barriers. We want this to go towards a more circular, inclusive economy in that way of reuse.
Great.
So there's some learning there to do into the next wave, but we're excited. Hopefully that will be in our future.
Awesome. Great. I
All
think
right,
that wraps
thanks.
up questions, right, Joel?
Yeah, I think that's it for questions. Well, thanks again for coming, and we'll all look forward to seeing what happens in the coming months.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me. Thank you everybody for listening.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. All right, let's see. Moving into the civic hacking portion of our presentation. We have a Slack channel where a lot of our communications happens. If you're not on there, you can get on there by going to slackme.shyhacknight.org. But right now, we are going to jump into a Zoom and look at each other in the eyes. Pretty excited. It's going to be at https, never mind that part, bit.ly. That's bit.ly/chn-remote-zoom. And that's going to get put there in the YouTube comments. And we'll also have a link to that in the Slack that I just mentioned. And tonight's broadcast will be posted in the coming days on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. And Derek, what have I missed?
I think the only thing that's left is our catchphrase.
That's right. Stay safe, take care, and
go forth and
hack.
all right, thanks everyone.
See you all in a minute.